Daniel had always been the man people pointed to with a subtle nod of admiration. At 38, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had navigated life storms and come out unscathed. His posture was straight, his smile impeccably rehearsed, and his words always tailored to his audience. To his colleagues, he was the rising star, the man destined to step into powerful shoes once Clara, the legendary executive of the company, retired. To neighbors and acquaintances, he was half of a golden couple, the handsome husband who never seemed to falter, and the devoted wife who lit up a room with her grace. Maya, 35, wore her strength differently. Where Daniel's charm dazzled in the spotlight, hers radiated quietly, a steady flame that never wavered. She had given up certain career ambitions years ago to support Daniel's long hours and restless drive. Her friends often envied her, married to a man who was ambitious yet attentive, wealthy yet grounded. At least that was the image. She played the role perfectly, smiling through dinners, hosting colleagues with warmth, listening with patient attentiveness to Daniel's endless stories about office politics and corporate rivalries. But beneath her calm exterior, Maya carried questions that never left her alone. Small details, a shirt cuff with lipstick faint enough to be dismissed, messages on Daniel's phone that buzzed late at night, marked urgent yet erased by morning. His sudden, unexplained preoccupation with company events, often insisting that certain meetings were for executives only. When she asked, Daniel's answers were gentle but curt, designed to soothe rather than inform. And then there was Clara. Clara had been a formidable figure in Daniel's career from the beginning. At 52, she commanded every room she entered. She was known for her impeccable suits, sharp intellect, and the way she could make or break a career with a single recommendation. At company gatherings, Clara and Daniel shared an undeniable rhythm. He knew when to laugh at her jokes, when to agree with her insights, and when to step aside and let her dominate the conversation. Maya noticed it early on, the unspoken synchronization between them. Colleagues explained it away as professional respect, the sort of rapport a protege and mentor naturally developed. But Maya's instincts, sharper than Daniel ever gave her credit for, told her it was something else. The announcement of Clara's retirement sparked waves through the company. A farewell gala was planned, a grand event at one of the city's finest hotels, with crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, and an endless guest list of industry elites. Daniel was given the honor of delivering one of the main speeches, a testament to how closely he had worked under Clara's wing. To most, this was a career-defining moment, proof that Daniel had arrived at the pinnacle of recognition. To Maya, it was an opportunity. The decision came to her late at night as she lay beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing after yet another day of unexplained lateness. She realized that confronting him privately would change nothing. He was too skilled at words, too quick to twist suspicion into insecurity. No, the truth needed light, not shadows. It needed witnesses. And what better stage than the farewell party itself, the place where Clara's legacy would be celebrated and Daniel's devotion paraded before all? Maya was not reckless. She did not rush into confrontation with anger clouding her judgment. Instead, she began to observe with the precision of someone who knew her survival depended on details. She memorized Daniel's tone when he spoke of Clara. She noticed how he described her with admiration, too intimate for mere professionalism. She paid attention to his movements, how his phone was always angled away when Clara's name appeared. Each piece was a thread, and together they began to weave a tapestry of betrayal she could no longer ignore. Yet even as her suspicions solidified, she carried herself with composure. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She attended company dinners, laughed at the appropriate times, and even assisted Daniel in rehearsing his speech for the farewell party. She stood beside him at functions, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the image of loyalty and support. But beneath the surface, she was steel, her mind already shaping the moment when the facade would shatter. The day of the farewell loomed closer, and with it came a storm no one could predict. Daniel walked taller, rehearsing his words with pride, convinced that his world was about to expand even further. Clara prepared to bask in the admiration of her peers, unaware that the shadow of her choices would soon stain her legacy. And Maya waited, her heart steady, her resolve unshakable. The world believed they were the perfect couple. Soon that illusion would end. Daniel's life was a study in duality. To most, he was the devoted husband and ambitious executive, a man with enviable discipline who balanced both home and work with apparent ease. But once the office doors closed and the eyes of colleagues and friends shifted elsewhere, Daniel's world fractured into something far more dangerous, a double life carefully hidden in plain sight. The affair with Clara had not begun with intention. At least that's what Daniel told himself on nights when guilt stirred beneath the surface. It had started innocently enough. Late nights in the office, Daniel poring over presentations, and Clara stopping by to offer advice. She had always been generous with her mentorship, her sharp insights carving his rough ideas into polished strategies that dazzled. The board at first, it was admiration. Then came the dinners after work, ostensibly to discuss projects in a quieter setting. A touch on the hand here, laughter lingering too long there, lines blurred, and before he realized it, or perhaps before he admitted it, he had crossed into territory that would forever alter his marriage. Clara had not discouraged him. On the contrary, she welcomed his attention. For a woman who had built her empire on power and command, Daniel's eagerness was flattering. At 52, she carried the kind of confidence that only decades of hard-won battles could give. But she also knew what it was to feel overlooked in favor of younger, hungrier faces. Daniel's devotion fed her pride, and their relationship soon became more than whispers in boardrooms. She was both lover and gatekeeper, her influence tethering him tightly to her orbit. For Daniel, the affair offered more than passion. It was a lifeline to advancement. He knew that Clara's recommendations carried weight beyond titles. With her favor, doors opened. Projects were assigned to him over others, promotions dangled within reach. He convinced himself he deserved it, that the world of business was ruthless and demanded compromises. After all, wasn't he still a good husband at heart? He provided for Maya, kept her in comfort, played the part of the doting partner at family gatherings. If his conscience pricked him late at night, he buried it under justifications and Clara's reassuring words. But guilt had a way of finding cracks. Daniel avoided Maya's gaze more often, sensing the questions in her eyes. He became practiced in evasion, leaving for emergency meetings, silencing his phone at home, deleting messages with surgical precision. He thought himself careful, meticulous, the architect of a secret only he could control. Yet every lie was a stone, and the wall he built between himself and his wife grew higher with each passing month. Clara, meanwhile, relished the secrecy. To her, it was thrilling, a final act of rebellion before retirement. She had spent years being the untouchable figure in the company, respected but also isolated. With Daniel, she allowed herself vulnerability. She spoke of regrets, of the loneliness that came with power, of nights spent in empty penthouses where silence pressed harder than applause. Daniel became both confidant and escape, a man who saw her not only as a boss but as a woman. Still, Clara's affection was laced with control. She reminded him, often with a half smile, how much she had done for him, how much of his success was tied to her influence. It was a bond he could not easily sever without jeopardizing everything he had worked for. And so, he clung to her, torn between desire, ambition, and the remnants of love he still owed Maya. The dual life wore on him. At times, when Maya reached out with her gentle concern, he longed to confess, to collapse into her trust as he once had. But fear silenced him. Fear of losing her, fear of exposure, fear of watching his carefully constructed life crumble. So he smiled, he kissed her cheek, and he left again under the guise of work. Maya, though, was no fool. She noticed the way Daniel's tone changed when Clara's name arose in conversation. She observed his nervous energy whenever a message from his boss lit up his phone. Daniel believed himself a master of deception, but his wife had been studying him for years. While he built walls of lies, she quietly gathered fragments of truth, her silence more dangerous than confrontation. The farewell party was the perfect storm brewing in the distance. Clara saw it as her crowning celebration, Daniel as his opportunity to solidify his place in the company's future. But for Maya, it was becoming something else entirely, the stage upon which masks would slip, and the double life Daniel thought he controlled would finally unravel. Behind closed doors, love had decayed into secrecy, power had tangled with desire, and loyalty had been traded for ambition. What Daniel failed to realize was that secrets never remain buried forever. They waited for the moment when the world was watching, and then mercilessly they demanded to be revealed. The weeks leading up to the farewell party unfolded like a carefully wound clock, every tick marking the approach of an inevitable collision. For Daniel, the event was nothing short of monumental, a chance to showcase his loyalty to Clara, to stand before the company as the protege she trusted most. For Clara, it was the culmination of decades of dominance, a final evening in which the spotlight would glorify her name. And for Maya, it was the battlefield she had quietly chosen, the place where her doubts would crystallize into undeniable truth. At home, preparations carried a deceptive normalcy. Daniel rehearsed his speech in front of the mirror, his voice shifting from nervous quivers to polished confidence as the days passed. Maya sat on the edge of the bed or leaned against the doorway, pretending to listen with admiration. In reality, she dissected every syllable, every slip of emotion that leaked through his tone. When he spoke of Clara, her brilliance, her generosity, her role in shaping his career, his words carried a warmth that no colleague deserved. He didn't even notice the difference, but Maya did. She became meticulous in her own preparations. In the mornings, she revisited the memories of small betrayals. A late-night call Daniel insisted was just work, the faint perfume on his suit that was too rich to be her own, the way his eyes brightened when Clara's name appeared in conversation. She cataloged them like evidence in a case, each one sharpening her resolve. By the second week, she had stopped asking questions. Silence, she realized, was her greatest weapon. If Daniel suspected nothing, his guard would remain down, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Maya also began to prepare herself. Outwardly, she invested in a new gown for the party, one that draped her figure in understated elegance rather than flamboyance. She wanted to stand out not with glitter or flash, but with quiet dignity, the kind that commanded attention without needing to beg for it. She booked an appointment at her favorite salon, making sure every detail of her appearance would reflect composure, strength, and the confidence of a woman who knew more than she revealed. Meanwhile, Daniel lived in a haze of anticipation. Every night, he stayed late at the office, coordinating the logistics of the event with Clara and other executives. He often came home exhausted, falling into bed without much conversation, believing Maya's silence was acceptance rather than calculation. He imagined himself on stage, microphone in hand, delivering lines that would draw applause and perhaps a discreet tear from Clara. In his mind, it was the perfect transition, her farewell as leader, his arrival as the heir apparent. Clara, on the other hand, reveled in the grandness of it all. The gala was to be held at the Imperial Hotel, its ballroom draped in gold and silver, chandeliers polished until they gleamed like captured stars. A guest list of the city's most influential figures was already confirmed. Board members, political leaders, rival executives. For Clara, it was a coronation disguised as a farewell. She saw herself as irreplaceable, and Daniel as the living proof of her influence. He was her chosen successor, in more ways than one. Maya quietly absorbed the details from Daniel's casual updates, the venue, the guest list, the order of speeches. She asked just enough questions to keep him unsuspecting, nodding with polite interest, as though she were merely a supportive wife preparing for another social obligation. Inside, though, she was sketching her own plan. Timing would be everything. Too early, and her words could be dismissed as jealousy. Too late, and the impact would fade into chaos. She wanted precision, a revelation so undeniable it would pierce through the glamour and leave scars. On the morning of the party, Maya woke with unusual calm. She moved through her routine with measured grace, her reflection in the mirror revealing not the anxious woman of past weeks, but someone transformed. The choice had been made, and with it came clarity. Daniel kissed her on the cheek before leaving for the final rehearsals, mistaking her serenity for support. As she applied her makeup that evening, she thought of the years she had given him. Birthdays celebrated, sacrifices made, late nights waiting for him to come home. She thought of the trust she had extended like a bridge, only to watch him set fire to it from the other side. And still, she did not cry. The time for tears was over. By the time Daniel returned to pick her up, dressed in a tailored suit that gave him the air of a man ascending, Maya was ready. She took his arm as they walked out the door, her smile calm, her eyes unreadable. The Imperial Hotel awaited, its glittering chandeliers promising a night of grandeur. For Daniel, it was the culmination of ambition. For Clara, the crowning jewel of her career. But for Maya, it was the stage she had been waiting for, the place where masks would shatter and truth would step, uninvited, into the light. The Imperial Hotel glittered like a jewel against the evening sky. Guests streamed through its marble entrance, their laughter echoing across the grand foyer as waiters in crisp uniforms balanced trays of champagne flutes. The ballroom doors stood open, revealing a world of golden chandeliers, polished floors, and velvet drapes that shimmered under soft lighting. It was a stage set for celebration, but beneath the music and applause, an invisible storm was waiting to break. Daniel arrived with Maya on his arm, every inch the polished executive. His black suit was tailored to perfection, his hair neatly styled, his smile rehearsed for charm. Maya's gown, a deep emerald green, clung to her figure with understated elegance, the color catching the light like precious stone. She moved beside him with quiet poise, her hand lightly brushing his sleeve, her expression warm but unreadable. To the crowd, they looked like the perfect couple, effortlessly admired as they stepped into the throng of guests. The room buzzed with energy. Colleagues clustered in small groups, raising toasts to Clara's legendary career. Some spoke in hushed tones about the company's future, glancing occasionally at Daniel with thinly veiled curiosity. Others laughed loudly, the champagne already loosening their tongues. Every eye turned when Clara entered. She arrived like royalty, draped in a silver gown that sparkled under the chandeliers. At 52, her presence was as commanding as ever, her chin lifted, her smile radiant. Applause erupted as she crossed the ballroom, shaking hands, exchanging kisses on cheeks, accepting tributes as though they were her birthright. Daniel's eyes followed her instantly, the flicker of admiration too swift for most to notice. But Maya saw it. She always saw it. Clara's gaze swept the room before settling on Daniel. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, a silent acknowledgement that passed between them like a spark. Clara smiled faintly, the kind of smile meant only for him, and moved on to greet others. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Maya, it was confirmation. As the evening unfolded, the tributes began. Executives stood one after another, praising Clara's leadership, recounting her victories, and offering gratitude for her decades of service. The speeches painted her as more than a leader. They painted her as a savior of the company, a visionary whose legacy would endure. Guests raised their glasses in unison, the clinking of crystal filling the air like music. Daniel's turn was approaching. He sat at a round table near the front, Maya at his side, Clara across the room surrounded by admirers. He rehearsed his lines silently, lips moving just enough for Maya to notice. His hand tapped restlessly against his thigh, betraying nerves he tried to disguise with a smile. Maya sipped her champagne slowly, her eyes scanning the room. Every detail imprinted itself on her mind. The glow of the chandeliers, the swirl of gowns across the dance floor, the hushed whispers of guests leaning close to share rumors. The atmosphere was thick with celebration, but beneath it all, she felt the hum of truth pressing closer. When Daniel's name was announced, the applause swelled. He rose, straightening his suit jacket, and kissed Maya lightly on the cheek before making his way to the stage. Maya's smile remained fixed, but inside her pulse quickened. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the stage where his mask would begin to slip. The microphone gleamed under the lights as Daniel began to speak. His voice carried confidence, practiced yet warm. He spoke of Clara's achievements, of her tireless dedication to the company, of the countless lives she had influenced. The audience listened raptly, nodding, smiling, raising their glasses in agreement. But Maya heard more than the words. She heard the inflections in his voice when he spoke of Clara's unparalleled support, the tenderness that laced his tone when he called her an inspiration not only in the boardroom, but in life. These were not the words of a protege speaking of a mentor. They were the words of a man speaking of someone far more personal. Clara's eyes glistened as he spoke, her smile touched with something softer than pride. Around the room, a few guests exchanged subtle looks, sensing an intimacy they could not quite name. To them, it was a curious detail. To Maya, it was vindication. As Daniel concluded his speech, the room erupted in applause. Clara rose, crossing the stage to embrace him, her hand lingering on his back a second too long. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment forever. The image would be remembered as a mentor and protege celebrating a career milestone. But Maya knew the truth behind the smiles. She sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, her face serene. On the surface, she was the supportive wife, glowing with pride at her husband's success. But inside, the fire burned brighter. The cracks were showing, and soon the whole mask would crumble. Tonight was Clara's celebration, but soon it would become something else entirely. The applause lingered long after Daniel stepped down from the stage. Guests rose to their feet, clapping with enthusiasm, some even whistling in appreciation. To the untrained eye, it was a flawless moment. The loyal protege praising the formidable leader, a seamless passing of the torch. Yet beneath the glittering surface, something subtle had shifted. Maya felt it in the air, like a thread stretched taut. As Clara embraced Daniel on stage, her hand resting against his back for a moment too long, Maya noticed the flicker of awareness ripple through the audience. It was in the raised eyebrows of one board member, the whisper exchange between two women near the back, the cautious glance a younger colleague threw toward Clara. Nothing overt, nothing that could be named aloud. But it was there, the first crack in the carefully constructed facade. Daniel returned to the table with a triumphant smile, sliding into the seat beside Maya. His hand brushed hers briefly, as though grounding himself, but she kept her palm cool against the tablecloth. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Did it sound all right?" he whispered, his tone seeking validation. "It was perfect," Maya replied softly, her lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes. He relaxed instantly, mistaking her composure for approval. Maya let him believe it. Across the room, Clara dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief, laughing lightly as colleagues teased her about the sentiment of the evening. But Maya saw more than sentiment. She saw Clara's gaze flicker repeatedly toward Daniel, her expression softening in a way that betrayed far more than professional admiration. As the dinner courses were served, conversation flowed. Guests leaned across tables, recounting stories of Clara's brilliance, praising her leadership style, debating what the company's future would look like without her. And yet, woven between the laughter and clinking glasses, there was an undercurrent, a whisper that could not be silenced. Maya caught fragments of it, a woman at the next table murmuring, "He speaks of her so personally." A man answering, "They've always been close, haven't they?" Their tones were curious, not accusatory, but the seed had been planted. Daniel, oblivious, basked in the afterglow of his speech. He laughed too loudly at jokes, gestured broadly as he spoke with younger executives, and accepted compliments with the humility of a man who knew he had nailed his performance. Maya watched him, her face serene, but inside she catalogued each movement, each gesture. The more he shone under the chandelier light, the more fragile his mask became. She thought of the years she had spent by his side, the countless sacrifices hidden behind his success. And now, as she watched him beam proudly, she felt not sorrow but clarity. The man before her was no longer her husband in truth. He was a stranger dressed in familiar skin, a man whose loyalty had been traded for ambition and desire. Clara, too, seemed unable to contain herself fully. When Daniel glanced across the room, her lips parted in the faintest of smiles, private and lingering. She masked it quickly when others turned her way, but Maya caught every flicker. Clara was careful, but not careful enough. Tonight, under the relentless gaze of 100 witnesses, even the smallest gestures screamed louder than words. As the evening wore on, the cracks widened. A few guests began to speculate openly, their voices low but insistent. One remarked on the tenderness in Daniel's tone, another on the way Clara had embraced him. Whispers traveled swiftly, weaving through the crowd like smoke, impossible to contain once released. Maya listened without joining, her expression placid, her silence deliberate. When the band struck up music and couples drifted onto the dance floor, Daniel turned to Maya, offering his hand. She accepted with graceful ease, rising to join him under the chandeliers. They moved together in practiced steps, the picture of marital harmony. Yet as Daniel's hand rested at her waist, Maya felt only distance. His eyes, though fixed on her face, carried a shadow she had come to recognize, a shadow that belonged to someone else. Around them, the whispers grew bolder. People noticed more now, saw what had always been hidden. Clara stood at the edge of the dance floor, smiling at the dancers. But her gaze lingered on Daniel, her expression unguarded for a fleeting second. It was enough. Maya felt the room shifting, the collective awareness growing heavier. The time was approaching. Soon she would no longer need to hint or suspect. The truth was already pressing against the seams of the evening, threatening to spill free. All she had to do was give it a final push. As the music swelled and Daniel twirled her gently, Maya's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. He thought she was enjoying the dance, savoring the moment. In reality, she was savoring the inevitability. The cracks were widening, and soon the mask would shatter entirely. Tonight was no longer about Clara's legacy or Daniel's ambition. Tonight belonged to Maya, and she would claim it. The ballroom glittered with laughter and music, but to Maya it all sounded like static, muffled by the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She sat at the table, eyes sweeping across the room, studying the faces of the guests, their smiles, their whispers, the way their attention kept drifting between Clara and Daniel. It was all building to the moment she had been waiting for. The opportunity came as naturally as if the evening had been designed for her. After the dinner plates were cleared and the music softened, the master of ceremonies announced an open floor for anyone wishing to share final words in Clara's honor. Several guests eagerly rose, colleagues, friends, and former protégés, each delivering heartfelt anecdotes. The air was thick with admiration, a chorus of voices elevating Clara to near mythical heights. Then before the applause for the last speaker had even faded, Maya rose to her feet. Her movement drew immediate attention. She was not an employee, not a board member, not one of Clara's protégés. She was simply the wife of Daniel, the rising star. Yet the poise with which she carried herself, the elegance of her emerald gown shimmering under the chandeliers, silenced the chatter instantly. Even Daniel blinked in surprise, half, rising from his seat as though to stop her. But she was already walking toward the stage. Clara watched with a polite smile, clearly unprepared for what was coming. Daniel's chest tightened, his throat suddenly dry. Maya ascended the small staircase, her heels clicking softly against the polished wood, and accepted the microphone with graceful hands. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady, warm, and clear. "I know I'm not part of this company. I don't stand among you as a colleague or protégé, but I stand here as someone who has watched from the sidelines the profound influence Clara has had on this place, and on my husband." There was polite applause, though the curiosity in the room was palpable. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smile frozen, his fingers tightening around the stem of his glass. Maya continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Clara is more than a leader. She is a force, a woman whose brilliance and power have shaped not just the future of this company, but the lives of those who served under her." She paused, her gaze sliding briefly toward Clara. "Especially my husband." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut through the polite veneer of the evening. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Clara's smile faltered, just slightly, but Maya pressed on. "Daniel has often spoken of Clara's support, her generosity. He has called her an inspiration, not just in the boardroom, but in life." She allowed the silence to stretch, the implication sinking in. Then she leaned in closer to the microphone. "And I've seen just how true that is." Gas fluttered across the room. Daniel's hand slammed against the table as he shot to his feet. "Maya," he began, his voice a sharp whisper of warning, but she did not flinch. "You see, when a husband begins coming home late, when phone calls are silenced, when messages are erased, a wife notices. When his shirt smells of perfume she doesn't wear, when his eyes light up at the mention of another woman's name, she notices." Her tone sharpened, her words slicing with precision. "And when that other woman is his boss, when admiration crosses the line into something more, Well, that becomes impossible to ignore. The ballroom had gone deathly quiet. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Clara and Daniel. Clara's face had drained of color, her carefully constructed composure faltering. Daniel's fist clenched, his jaw tight, his entire body tense as though bracing for impact. Maya reached into the small clutch she carried and withdrew her phone. With a single swipe, she projected a screenshot onto the large screen behind the stage, the same screen that had displayed company photos and farewell tributes earlier in the night. A murmur surged through the crowd as Clara's name lit up on the screen, attached to a message too intimate to be mistaken. Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel you beside me. Don't let her suspect. Yours always, C. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, sharp whispers filled the air, like a storm breaking loose. Some guests stared in disbelief, others covered their mouths, while a few exchanged knowing glances as if confirming suspicions they had long harbored. Cameras flashed, phones lifted discreetly, capturing the scandal as it unfolded live. Daniel lunged toward the stage, his voice breaking. Maya, stop this! But Clara's voice, usually so commanding, trembled as she interjected. This is not appropriate. Maya turned toward her, her gaze steady, unblinking. No, Clara. What's not appropriate is betraying decades of marriage. What's not appropriate is building a career on the ashes of trust. Her words struck with the weight of truth. Clara faltered, her lips parting, but no words coming. Daniel's face burned crimson, sweat beating at his temples. Around them, the room dissolved into chaos, guests whispering, some rising from their seats, others retreating toward the exits. Maya lowered the microphone, her face calm, her dignity intact. She had said enough. The truth no longer belonged to her alone. It was now alive in the room, undeniable and irreversible. As she stepped down from the stage, she felt no need to look back at Daniel or Clara. The weight of their secrets had shifted from her shoulders to theirs, and it was crushing them already. The farewell party had ended, though the night was far from over. Clara's legacy, Daniel's ambition, both lay shattered in the glittering ruins of a ballroom that no longer celebrated, but whispered scandal. The ballroom was no longer the stage for celebration. It had become a theater of scandal. The chandeliers still sparkled above, but the air beneath them was heavy with whispers, the clink of glasses replaced by the hushed shock of gossip. Guests slipped out discreetly, their conversations hurried and urgent, already carrying the story into the night like wildfire. The Imperial Hotel, chosen to honor Clara's legacy, would be remembered instead as the place where truth cracked open and swallowed two lives whole. Daniel stood frozen near the stage, his face pale beneath the harsh lights. A man who once thrived on charm and eloquence now found no words. His eyes darted to Maya, but she did not spare him a glance. He reached for her, but his hand fell uselessly to his side, as though he already knew she was beyond his reach. Clara remained at the head table, her silver gown gleaming like armor that no longer protected her. Her expression was a mask of strained composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. For years she had built an empire on control of boardrooms, of reputations, of destinies. Tonight, control had slipped away in a matter of seconds, torn from her by a woman she had underestimated. Around them, colleagues muttered in disbelief. Some stared at Clara with disappointment, others with thinly veiled satisfaction. The protégés who once idolized her avoided her gaze, already calculating how to distance themselves. The board members exchanged stiff glances, murmuring about reputational damage and the company's future. The farewell that should have enshrined Clara's brilliance had instead left her legacy in tatters. Maya, calm amid the chaos, walked toward the exit. She did not hurry, nor did she falter. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each step a declaration of strength. People parted for her instinctively, as though recognizing the quiet power she carried. She felt the eyes on her, the pity, the admiration, the shock, but none of it touched her. She had not come for their validation. She had come for her truth, and she had delivered it. Behind her, Daniel's voice finally broke through, raw and desperate. Maya, please, just wait. She paused only long enough to turn her head slightly, her expression unreadable. His face was a portrait of ruin, sweat at his temples, his jaw trembling, eyes wide with fear. He looked less like the confident man she had married and more like a boy caught in a lie too large to contain. "There's nothing left to say," Maya replied, her tone even. Her words carried no anger, no tears, only finality. Clara rose then, her voice sharp, trying to salvage what dignity she could. "Maya, this spectacle helps no one. You've—" But Maya cut her off with a glance that silenced even Clara, who had cowed countless executives with her authority. "No, Clara," Maya said quietly, so that only those nearest could hear. "This wasn't a spectacle. This was the truth, and the truth doesn't ask permission to be spoken." With that, she turned and left the ballroom. The night air outside was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere she had just left behind. The city lights glimmered in the distance, alive and indifferent, as if reminding her that the world kept turning, no matter how deeply lives fractured within it. She inhaled deeply, the first breath in months that felt free of weight. Daniel did not follow her immediately. He remained inside, drowning in the aftermath. Colleagues avoiding his gaze, Clara's reputation collapsing alongside his own. When he finally stumbled out much later, the parking lot was empty, Maya's car already gone. He stood alone under the street lamps, the reality sinking in. His career was in ruins, his marriage broken, his secret no longer hidden, but branded on him for all to see. Clara retreated to her penthouse that night, but solitude offered no comfort. The whispers would grow into headlines. The board would question her judgment. And the protégés she once nurtured would scatter like birds from a burning tree. She had thought herself untouchable. Tonight proved otherwise. Maya, meanwhile, drove through the quiet streets, her hands steady on the wheel. She did not cry. The tears had already been shed in silence long before this night. What filled her now was something sharper and cleaner, a resolve that the truth had freed her from chains she hadn't realized were binding her. She had exposed the betrayal not just to the world, but to herself, and in doing so, reclaimed the power that had been stolen. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back was not broken. She was remade. As the city skyline disappeared behind her, Maya felt the weight of the past slipping away. The marriage was over, the illusions shattered, but her dignity remained intact. For years, she had been the silent partner, the supportive wife standing in the background. Tonight, she had stepped into the light, and in doing so, she had rewritten the ending. The night belonged to her now.